I never imagined I'd inherit anything from my grandfather, Thomas Garrett. He was a recluse, a specter haunting our family history, spoken of in hushed tones rather than cherished memories. My last sighting of him was at my 8th birthday party, where he'd huddled in a corner, nursing a beer and mumbling about delivery schedules and arcane protocols. My parents had long dismissed him as merely eccentric, but now his house, nestled deep within Perdition Valley, was mine, along with whatever secrets lurked within its walls. The lawyer's call came on a Tuesday morning, as I was listlessly staring at my laptop screen, trying to stretch my dwindling unemployment benefits for another week. "Mr. Garrett bequeathed you his property?" The voice rasped, crackling through a faulty connection that kept cutting in and out. "You'll need to claim it in person. There are special circumstances." 3 days later, I found myself driving down a dusty Texas highway, headed toward a town that was conspicuously absent from my GPS. The instant I crossed what felt like an invisible threshold into Perdition Valley, the world seemed to subtly warp around me. The oppressive heat was almost a tangible thing, thick enough to taste, yet the air was eerily still. No birdsong pierced the silence, no insects buzzed, and no wind dared to stir the parched grass along the roadside. Even the radio succumbed to static, leaving me utterly alone with the sound of my engine and the growing, unsettling sensation that I was being watched. The town itself was a dismal collection of faded buildings that appeared to have been baking under the relentless sun for decades longer than the rest of Texas. Paint peeled from the weathered wood in ragged strips. Windows were coated in a thick layer of grime and accumulated dust, and the few inhabitants I saw moved with a strange, jerky rhythm that made my skin crawl. They offered no wave, no acknowledgement of my presence, merely turned their heads to follow my movements with vacant, unblinking stares. I pulled up to the house that was now my responsibility, a Victorian relic that had once been grand but now sagged precariously under the crushing weight of neglect. The wraparound porch leaned at a disturbing angle. The intricate gingerbread trim was cracked and missing chunks, and the front door hung slightly askew on its hinges. I located the key exactly where the lawyer had indicated, under the third loose board on the front steps. The door opened with a mournful groan that seemed to echo throughout the empty house. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with dust, carrying a faint metallic tang that made my throat tighten. Furniture sat shrouded in yellowed sheets, like ghosts frozen in time, and the wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing dark, unsettling stains beneath that looked disturbingly organic. The house felt unnervingly alive, not in a comforting way, but as if it were watching me, patiently waiting for something I couldn't possibly comprehend. Shadows flickered at the periphery of my vision, and cold spots materialized and vanished without explanation. The floorboards creaked underfoot with sounds that seemed too deliberate, too rhythmic to be the result of random settling. I found myself jumping at every unexpected sound, every whisper of wind that slipped through the broken window panes. The kitchen held the faint, lingering smell of old smoke, and the fireplace in the living room was filled with ashes that looked strangely fresh despite the house having been empty for years. Upstairs, the bedrooms were sparse but surprisingly clean, as if someone had been diligently maintaining them. The master bedroom contained a massive oak dresser with drawers that stubbornly resisted my attempts to open them, and a bed that creaked ominously when I sat on its edge. On my second day, while exploring the depths of the basement, I stumbled upon something that fundamentally altered everything. The basement itself was unremarkable. Stone walls, a concrete floor, a few dusty boxes of forgotten Christmas decorations. But when I leaned against the far wall, it yielded with a soft, grinding sound. Behind the cleverly concealed false wall was a narrow staircase leading down into impenetrable darkness, the air growing noticeably colder with each descending step. The hidden room was larger than I had anticipated, filled with rows of filing cabinets, meticulously drawn maps, and stacks of leather-bound notebooks. The filing cabinets contained yellowed papers filled with delivery schedules dating back 4 decades, all written in my grandfather's precise, meticulous handwriting. Hand-drawn maps of the town covered one entire wall, with certain addresses circled ominously in red ink and connected by lines that formed intricate, complex patterns. Some of these addresses didn't exist on any map I had ever encountered, and others were marked with cryptic symbols that looked vaguely occult. The notebooks were, without a doubt, the most disturbing discovery. Page after page contained careful documentation about special packages, specific handling protocols, and stringent containment procedures. There were entries about specific residents, detailed compatibility ratings, and something referred to as vessel assignments. The most recent entries were dated a mere 3 weeks prior, shortly before my grandfather's sudden death. I desperately needed money, and Perdition Valley had exactly one employer that was actively hiring: the local UPS depot. The building was a converted warehouse located on the outskirts of town, unnervingly clean and sterile when compared to the rest of the dilapidated community. The parking lot was filled with an excessive number of brown delivery trucks, far more than seemed necessary for a town of this size, and the loading dock buzzed with a level of activity that felt too organized, too purposeful. The manager, Thompson, was a visibly nervous man in his late 50s who seemed incapable of making direct eye contact. His hands trembled constantly, and he possessed the pale, gaunt look of someone who hadn't experienced a decent night's sleep in years. His office was sparsely decorated, save for a peculiar collection of laminated cards displayed prominently on his desk and a crucifix hanging on the wall directly behind him. "Look, son," Thompson said, sliding the cards across his desk with trembling fingers. "This isn't your typical delivery route. Your grandfather, he understood the special requirements of this position." "Special requirements?" I asked, picking up the cards. Each one contained a single, stark rule written in bold block letters. "It's just delivering packages, right?" Thompson's hands continued to shake violently as he watched me read. "These 8 rules aren't mere suggestions. They're survival instructions. Previous drivers who failed to adhere to them." He paused abruptly, staring intently at something behind me. "They are no longer with us. What happened to them? Let's just say they found new employment opportunities permanently." The rules themselves seemed less like guidelines and more like the frantic scribblings of a mind teetering on the brink. Rule 1. Never shake packages that rattle despite appearing empty. Rule 2. Always wear gloves when handling packages radiating warmth. Rule 3. If a package whispers your name, immediate delivery is paramount. Rule 4. Never gaze directly at packages emitting an inner glow. Rule 5. Should you hear screaming emanating from within a package, proceed directly to the church. Rule 6. Packages exhibiting independent movement must be taken to the cemetery office. Rule 7. Under no circumstances are you to open any package, regardless of the recipient's request. Rule 8. If a package induces euphoria, set it down at once. "Mr. Thompson," I stated, my gaze fixed on his worn face, "these rules are unconventional. Unconventional is what keeps you alive in this line of work." His trembling hands produced employment paperwork. "Your grandfather was instrumental in establishing these protocols. He understood that certain deliveries necessitate specialized handling." I signed the documents, driven by financial need, but primarily because Thompson's palpable terror suggested these weren't merely arbitrary restrictions. The way he furtively glanced at the depot's shadowy back rooms, the way he recoiled at every unsettling sound, hinted at a deeper, more sinister purpose to this operation than simple package transit. The following morning, I encountered my partner in the UPS break room. Rosa Vasquez was a woman seemingly in her mid-30s, her dark hair restrained in a functional ponytail, her eyes carrying the weight of decades beyond her apparent age. She wore thin gloves despite the oppressive heat, maintaining a professional distance that barely concealed a profound, ingrained fear. "You're the new guy?" she inquired, pouring coffee from a machine that hummed with an unsettling intensity. "Jake's replacement?" "Jake?" I asked. Thompson said this was a new position. Rosa's fingers lingered on a small crucifix hanging from her neck, tracing its silver surface. "Jake was transferred. A sudden promotion, you could say." She paused, her eyes losing focus, staring into some unseen space. "He's much happier now, aren't you, Jake?" I scanned the empty break room, a prickling sensation crawling across my skin. What? Who are you talking to? Rosa snapped back to reality, blinking rapidly as if roused from a deep slumber. Sorry, thinking out loud. Long days, sometimes I forget who I'm talking to. She led me to the truck, a standard brown UPS van, albeit modified with additional padding in the cargo area and temperature controls that seemed excessively elaborate for routine package delivery. The glove compartment contained several pairs of heavy-duty work gloves, a small bottle containing what appeared to be holy water, and a handheld radio that emitted static even when powered off. The packages, Rosa explained as we began loading for our first route. They're not all standard deliveries. Some require special handling. She extended a pair of gloves towards me, her own hands exhibiting a slight tremor. Rule number 2. Always wear these when handling packages that feel warm. I immediately noticed that some of the packages felt wrong, not damaged or improperly packed, but wrong in ways that defied articulation. Some felt strangely hollow despite weight labels indicating significant mass. Others seemed to throb with subtle vibrations unrelated to any internal machinery. A few were uncomfortably warm to the touch, and one seemed to subtly shift and settle when I averted my gaze. What's in these packages, anyway? I asked, picking up a medium-sized box that rattled as if it contained loose screws or fragmented metal. Rosa's expression shifted instantly to one of stark panic. Don't shake that. Rule number 1. Remember? Come on. It's just... I gave the package a gentle shake to demonstrate its apparent harmlessness. Instantly, the box became searingly hot in my hands, forcing me to drop it onto the truck's floor. A low humming sound emerged from within, gradually intensifying in volume and menace. Rosa snatched the package with her gloved hands, her face drained of color with terror. Dios mío, she exclaimed, her voice thick with genuine dread. Drive to the church now. What the hell? Drive. Her eyes briefly flashed completely black before reverting to their normal brown. I said, drive to the church. Some things should stay contained. I drove to the small Catholic church on Main Street, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. The building was old but well-maintained, its bell tower casting elongated shadows across the deserted street. Rosa carried the package inside, engaged in a hurried exchange with Father Miguel in rapid Spanish, and returned empty-handed. Father Miguel watched us depart with an expression of weary resignation, as if this was a ritual he had performed countless times before. What just happened? I asked, my voice pitched higher than intended. You broke rule number 1, Rosa replied, her voice carefully modulated. Some packages, they don't like being disturbed. The remainder of our route unfolded with relative normalcy, although I began to discern unsettling patterns in the deliveries. Many recipients exhibited similar mannerisms, deliberate, measured speech patterns, and an aversion to direct eye contact. Several customers seemed to undergo personality shifts mid-conversation, their voices fluctuating in tone and accent without any apparent cause. At one address, an elderly woman accepted a package with hands that trembled as Rosa's had. As I handed it to her, her eyes momentarily flashed the same unsettling black I'd witnessed in Rosa's, and she smiled, revealing what seemed like an excessive number of teeth. Thank you, she said in a voice incongruous with her frail appearance. I've been waiting for this for so long. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that I'd just witnessed something of profound significance, though its exact nature remained elusive. Rosa remained quiet, occasionally muttering under her breath in Spanish and touching her crucifix for comfort. Rosa, I said during our lunch break, how long have you been doing this job? 3 years, she replied, unwrapping a sandwich with gloved hands. Started right after I moved here. And, these rules, do they make sense to you? Rosa Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the empty street beyond the truck's windshield. They make sense if you understand what we're really delivering. What do you mean? Some packages are just packages, but others... She touched her crucifix again, her fingers tracing the cool silver. Others are transport for things that need to travel but can't use normal methods. Transport for what? Old things, hungry things, things that should stay contained. That evening, I sat in my grandfather's kitchen, trying to process the unsettling reality I'd stepped into. The house felt different now, more alive, almost aware. I found myself listening intently for sounds that shouldn't exist, watching for movements in my peripheral vision that defied explanation. The refrigerator hummed with an odd, almost rhythmic pulse, and the pipes in the walls seemed to whisper secrets in inaudible conversations. Then I called my friend Mike back in Dallas, needing to hear a normal voice, a connection to the world I'd abruptly left behind. "Yeah, the job's weird," I told him, pacing the worn linoleum of the kitchen floor. "My partner, Rosa Vasquez, is eccentric, keeps talking about passengers and destinations like we're running some kind of spectral bus service instead of delivering packages. Some passengers pay a higher fare than others," Rosa Vasquez said from the doorway, her voice cutting through the air. I spun around, dropping my phone with a clatter. "Rosa Vasquez, how did you get in here?" She stood framed in the kitchen entrance, though I was certain I'd locked the front door securely. Her eyes possessed that same unfocused quality I'd noticed before, and she seemed to be listening to something utterly beyond my perception. "Your grandfather gave us a key," she said, her voice slightly altered, more formal, with a hint of an accent I couldn't quite place. "For emergencies." "Us? Who's us?" Rosa Vasquez blinked, her expression clearing like fog lifting from a mountain valley. "Me? I meant me. Sorry, I'm tired. It's been a long day." She left without offering any further explanation as to how she'd gained entry or the purpose of her visit, and I found myself staring at the closed door long after she was gone. The house felt more occupied than ever, as if our unsettling conversation had somehow invited something inside that had been patiently waiting outside. That night, I had vivid dreams of packages that moved of their own volition, whispering my name in voices that were disturbingly not quite human. I woke to find one of my grandfather's notebooks lying open on the nightstand, turned to a page I hadn't previously read. The entry, dated 3 years prior, was written in his careful, precise handwriting. "Rosa Vasquez opened the package today. Rule number 7, violation. She's sharing space now. God help us all." I was beginning to understand that my inheritance included far more than just a dilapidated house. It was a responsibility, a crushing burden, and a gateway into a nightmare I wasn't at all sure I could survive. The second day started with Rosa Vasquez calling me at dawn, her voice tight with a barely controlled panic. I could hear the raw strain even through the crackling phone connection that seemed to plague all communication in Perdition Valley. "Meet me at the depot early," she said urgently. "Something's happening to the packages." I dressed quickly, my mind still clouded with the lingering remnants of nightmares filled with shifting shadows and whispered voices. The morning air was thick and oppressive, carrying a metallic taste that made my throat constrict uncomfortably. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing in this forsaken place. Rosa Vasquez was already at the depot when I arrived, pacing anxiously near the loading dock, radiating nervous energy. Her gloves were pulled tight, and she kept touching her crucifix with an urgency that made my stomach clench with foreboding. "They're different today," she said without preamble, her voice low and strained. "The packages, they're changing." "Changing how?" She glanced around nervously before lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. "Some of them glow now, others whisper. And the ones that move on their own, they're getting more aggressive, more insistent." We walked into the sorting area, and I immediately understood the gravity of what she meant. Several packages emitted a faint, eerie light that seemed to pulse with an unnatural internal rhythm. Others vibrated softly, as if something trapped inside was desperately trying to escape. The very air felt charged, pregnant with unseen energy, like the unsettling moment before a violent thunderstorm. "Rule 4, Rosa Vasquez muttered, pointing to a nondescript cardboard box that cast strangely elongated shadows despite the harsh overhead fluorescent lighting. "Never look directly at packages that glow from within." I found myself inexplicably drawn to the glowing package, my eyes tracking the hypnotic light that seemed to shift and dance just beneath the cardboard surface. There was something disturbingly beautiful about it, something that made me want to lean closer to understand the source of such otherworldly illumination. "Don't!" Rosa Vasquez grabbed my arm, her fingers digging painfully into my flesh. "I made that mistake yesterday. It's like staring into a fire that burns your mind instead of your body." I had to wrench my gaze away before I lost myself completely. I forced myself to turn away, but the afterimage of that mesmerizing light remained burned into my retinas. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw impossible geometries, angles that shouldn't exist in our familiar three-dimensional world. As we began loading the truck, I noticed other packages with equally disturbing characteristics. Some felt unnaturally warm to the touch despite being stored in the cool depot. Others seemed to subtly shift and settle when I wasn't looking directly at them, as if their unseen contents were alive and restless. "Always wear gloves when handling packages that feel warm," Rosa Vasquez reminded me, pulling on a fresh pair of thick work gloves. "Rule number 2, the warmth isn't natural heat. It's something else entirely, something sinister." I slipped on my own gloves and carefully lifted a box that radiated heat like a small, contained furnace. Through the protective barrier of the gloves, I could feel something pulsing inside, a rhythmic throbbing that reminded me uncomfortably of a frantic heartbeat. Then I heard it, a soft, barely audible voice calling my name from inside a small, innocuous-looking package. The sound was barely perceptible, almost seductive in its gentleness, but it made every nerve ending in my body scream out in primal danger. "Rule 3, Rosa Vasquez said, her voice tight with palpable fear. "If a package whispers your name, deliver it immediately. Don't listen to what it says. Just deliver it and get away." The whispering persisted as we wrestled the package into the truck, a sound that seemed to bypass my eardrums entirely, resonating instead with something primal and buried deep within my brain. I found myself struggling to decipher the hushed words, desperate to understand the message the voice was trying to convey. Our first delivery was to the same house I'd visited the previous day, yet the recipient was markedly different. The woman who opened the door possessed the same face, the same general appearance, but her eyes now held an unfathomable depth that had been absent before. For a fleeting instant, they flickered to black before settling back into what appeared to be a normal brown. But that brief glimpse sent icy tendrils crawling across my skin. She accepted the package, her hands trembling almost imperceptibly, clutching it to her chest as if it were a priceless treasure. As she turned to retreat inside, I caught a glimpse of her profile. Her face seemed to shimmer and distort, as if something beneath the skin was struggling to reshape itself. "Did you see that?" I asked Rosa Vasquez as we made our way back to the truck. She nodded grimly. Their vessels now, hosts for the entities that hitchhike within the packages. The moment someone accepts a package and breaks its seal, they're irrevocably changed. Entities, demons, spirits, ancient things that require human bodies to exist within our reality. The packages are their mode of transportation. The weight of her words crashed down on me like a physical burden. I was beginning to grasp that this was far more than just an unusual delivery job. I was an unwitting participant in something far grander, far more terrifying than I could have ever conceived. Our next stop nearly shattered my sanity. We were delivering to a remote farmhouse when the package in my hands began to emit the most horrifying sound I'd ever encountered. Human screams, high-pitched and saturated with absolute, unadulterated terror. The screams seemed to emanate from multiple voices simultaneously, as if several souls were trapped within the confines of the cardboard box. "Drive to the church," Rosa Vasquez yelled above the cacophony, her face ashen with panic. "Now Rule 5. I slammed the accelerator, tearing through the deserted streets while the package continued its ghastly chorus. The screams intensified with each passing second, and I could have sworn I heard individual voices begging for salvation, pleading for release. Father Miguel was waiting for us at the church entrance, as if he had somehow sensed our imminent arrival. His face was etched with exhaustion, and his eyes held the weary resignation of a man who had performed this ritual far too many times. "Another emergency?" he asked, relieving Rosa Vasquez of the screaming package with practiced efficiency. He carried it inside, and through the open church doors, I could hear him commencing a hurried benediction in Latin. The screams gradually subsided, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt almost as disturbing as the noise had been. When Rosa Vasquez returned to the truck, she appeared utterly drained, as if the experience had prematurely aged her. "What was inside?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Souls," she replied simply. "Human souls being processed for transport. The screaming starts when they realize what's happening to them. Processed for what? For insertion into new hosts. The network doesn't just move entities around. It harvests human consciousness and redistributes it." The implications of her words left me reeling. We weren't merely delivering packages. We were facilitating the trafficking of human souls. During our lunch break, Rosa Vasquez finally divulged the truth about her condition. We sat in the truck parked behind an abandoned gas station, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant hum of power lines. 3 years ago, I was consumed by curiosity, she began, her voice barely audible. I opened a package. Rule number 7. Never open any package, even if asked by the recipient. I thought it was just a delivery job. I couldn't fathom why there were such bizarre restrictions. She paused, her fingers trembling as she clutched her crucifix. The instant I broke the seal, something emerged. Not physically, I couldn't see it, but I felt it invade me like ice water being poured directly into my brain. Now, I'm sharing space with something that shouldn't exist. What do you mean, sharing space? Sometimes it seizes control. Sometimes I'm no longer myself. I become the passenger, and it becomes the driver. Her eyes welled with tears. I'm losing ground every day. It's growing stronger, and I'm growing weaker. As if triggered by her confession, Rosa Vasquez's expression underwent a sudden and unsettling transformation. Her features remained the same, yet something fundamental shifted behind her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different cadence, a formal tone that was utterly foreign to the woman I'd been speaking to. "She speaks the truth," the voice said, using Rosa Vasquez's mouth. "We have been patient, but her resistance grows tiresome. Soon, there will be only us." I watched in mounting horror as Rosa Vasquez's eyes turned completely black, reflecting no light whatsoever. The thing speaking through her smiled with her face, but the expression was chillingly cold and alien. "You fascinate us," it continued. "Your grandfather was most useful in establishing our transportation network. We hope you will prove equally cooperative." Then, as abruptly as it had manifested, the entity withdrew. Rosa Vasquez blinked, her eyes returning to normal, and she looked around in confusion. "What happened?" she asked. "I lost time again, didn't I?" I couldn't bring myself to recount the horrifying spectacle I just witnessed. Instead, I helped her out of the truck and suggested we resume our route. The final delivery of the day was the most unnerving yet. We arrived at a secluded house where the package literally moved of its own accord, sliding across the truck bed like a living organism. The recipient, a man with hollow, sunken eyes, accepted it without uttering a word. I watched through the window as he opened the package. The instant the cardboard flaps parted, his body convulsed violently. His back arched, his limbs spasmed uncontrollably, and his mouth opened in a silent, agonizing scream. Then, just as suddenly, he was still. When he looked up, his eyes were pools of absolute black. When he spoke, his voice resonated with a profound depth, echoing the same formal cadence I'd previously heard from Rosa Vasquez. "Much better," he declared, flexing his fingers as though testing out newly acquired equipment. "The previous tenant proved wholly inadequate for our purposes." Rosa Vasquez seized my hand, her grip a desperate, tight vice. "That's how I got infected," she whispered, her voice laced with terror. 3 years ago, I thought I was merely delivering a gift to some elderly woman. Turns out, I was delivering her replacement. As we sped away, I found myself compulsively checking the rearview mirror. The man, or rather, the thing masquerading in his form, remained standing in his doorway, his gaze fixed on our departing truck until we rounded a bend and disappeared from view. That evening, I found it impossible to focus on anything. Every creak and groan within the house made me jump. Each shadow seemed to writhe with purposeful intent. I checked and rechecked the locks on the doors and windows, though I strongly suspected that mundane measures would prove futile against whatever dark forces we now faced. I unearthed my grandfather's notebook, desperately searching for any sliver of information that might shed light on the situation I'd unwittingly stumbled into. One entry, dated just 3 months prior, snagged my attention. The network expands at an alarming rate. Rosa Vasquez's resistance wanes. A replacement will be needed soon. Arrangements have been made for my grandson to inherit the house. He possesses the necessary bloodline compatibility for the work. God forgive me for the hell I'm about to condemn him to. The blood seemed to drain from my face as the horrifying truth dawned on me. My grandfather hadn't simply left me a house. He had, in effect, delivered me directly into the clutches of whatever malevolent entity controlled this supernatural transportation network. The shrill ring of my phone ripped me from my horrified contemplation. It was Rosa Vasquez, but her voice sounded different, aged, wearier than before. "Collection day approaches," she stated, dispensing with any preamble. "When the network calls, it takes what it requires. You need to be ready." "Ready for what, exactly?" I asked, my voice trembling. "To choose," she replied. "Fight and lose yourself completely, or cooperate and retain some fragment of your former self. Those are the only options available to you here in Perdition Valley." The line went dead, leaving me alone with the chilling realization that I was no longer just a delivery driver. I was now an integral part of something ancient and profoundly evil, a network that treated human souls as mere freight to be shipped and processed. And there was no escape. Outside my window, I could discern the faint glow of packages being loaded onto trucks throughout the town. The network never slept, never ceased its grim task of ferrying entities between hosts. I was trapped within a system far grander and more sinister than I could have ever imagined, and I was rapidly running out of time to decipher how to survive. The third day broke with a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to smother Perdition Valley like a thick, suffocating blanket. I awoke before sunrise, the air within my grandfather's house feeling colder than it had the previous night. The shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed to stretch and contort, as if imbued with life, and the subtle creaks of the old house sounded like whispers just beyond the threshold of comprehension. I lay in bed for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding against my ribs, the weight of the preceding days pressing down on me like a physical burden. The chilling knowledge that I was no longer merely a delivery driver, but rather a pawn in something ancient and terrible, gnawed relentlessly at my mind. Every sound within the house, the settling of old wood, the whisper of wind through cracked window panes, seemed to carry a hidden meaning that I couldn't quite grasp. A sharp, insistent knock at the door shattered the oppressive quiet. I stumbled downstairs, my legs unsteady, to find Rosa Vasquez standing on my porch. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a terror that sent a jolt of icy fear through my veins. Dark circles underscored her eyes, suggesting a sleepless night, and her hands trembled as she clutched her crucifix tightly. "Something's happening at the depot," she said urgently, her voice barely a whisper. "Thompson wants to see you now. They're moving things around. Big things. Important things." I dressed quickly, the unnatural chill of the house clinging to me as I moved through the rooms. Outside, the town remained shrouded in the gloom of early morning, but the usual oppressive heat had been replaced by a biting cold that felt alien to Texas. The air carried a metallic tang that made my throat constrict, and the silence was so profound it felt as if the world itself was holding its breath. As we drove through the deserted streets, I couldn't help but notice the twitching curtains in the windows and the fleeting glimpses of faces watching us pass. Their eyes were devoid of light, and their expressions were uniformly blank. The town felt like a stage set populated by lifeless mannequins. Upon arriving at the depot, the scene that unfolded before me was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. More trucks than I could have imagined were lined up at the loading docks, their brown shells gleaming faintly in the weak morning light. Workers moved with a strange, jerky precision, their eyes reflecting no light, their faces expressionless masks. The usual hum of conversation had been replaced by hushed phrases in languages that grated on my ears, syllables that seemed to bypass my conscious mind and speak directly to something primal and terrified within me. The very air crackled with an unnatural energy, like the moments before a violent thunderstorm. But instead of electricity, it throbbed with something far more sinister. I could feel it raising the hairs on my arms, making my skin crawl with the sensation of unseen insects. Thompson awaited us in his office, but the man I encountered was a far cry from the nervous, trembling figure I had met before. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and as cold as winter stone. The warmth had vanished entirely from his voice, replaced by a chilling calm that made my spine straighten involuntarily. "Sit down," he commanded, gesturing towards the chair across from his desk with a dismissive gesture that left no room for argument. "We need to discuss your future here, your real future." I sat, feeling Rosa Vasquez's presence behind me, a fragile shield against the unknown. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and I could hear her muttering prayers under her breath in Spanish. "Father Miguel, you've seen enough to know this isn't a normal delivery operation," Thompson began, his voice now imbued with an authority I'd never witnessed before, a stark contrast to his earlier demeanor. "UPS here is not just a shipping company. It's the most efficient supernatural transportation network ever created." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow, a gut-wrenching revelation. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. He rose and retrieved an ornate key from a locked drawer, its metal surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when my gaze drifted away. "Let me show you something, something that will help you understand your grandfather's true legacy." He led us through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," and down a narrow staircase that spiraled downwards, descending far deeper than the building's foundation should have permitted. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and rust, mingled with something else. Something organic, disturbingly wrong, that made my stomach churn in protest. The basement unfolded into a vast cavern, stretching into impenetrable darkness, illuminated only by the erratic flicker of fluorescent bulbs that cast dancing, grotesque shadows upon the walls. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched into the gloom, laden with packages that defied logic and reason. Some pulsed with an eerie, internal light. Others vibrated with a contained energy that caused the air around them to shimmer and distort. Still others whispered in voices too low to discern, yet loud enough to resonate within my very bones. Several packages moved of their own accord, sliding back and forth along the shelves like restless beasts pacing in their cages. One box near the entrance was riddled with what appeared to be breathing holes, and I could have sworn I heard something scratching frantically at the cardboard from within. "This is the containment facility," Thompson explained, his voice echoing strangely in the cavernous space. "Every package you deliver passes through here first. We process them, categorize them according to their contents and destinations, and ensure they reach their intended recipients." Intended destinations? My voice sounded small and hollow in the immensity of the chamber. Host bodies, human vessels for the entities that travel within these packages. He gestured towards a section marked with red symbols that seemed to throb with their own internal rhythm. These contain newly harvested consciousness, human souls extracted from their original bodies for redistribution to new hosts. Rosa Vasquez's hand gripped my shoulder with such force that her fingers dug painfully into my flesh, and I could feel her trembling violently behind me. "Your grandfather helped establish this network 40 years ago," Thompson continued, walking deeper into the storage area. "He understood that some things are too dangerous to exist without proper management and control. These entities aren't evil in any human sense. They're simply following their nature, seeking hosts and sustenance. This system keeps them contained and controlled while allowing them to fulfill their needs." "And the people they possess?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer that was sure to come. Thompson's expression remained cold and clinical, devoid of any empathy. acceptable casualties in service of a greater good. Without this network, these entities would run wild, consuming everything in their path. At least this way, we can manage the process, control the flow, minimize the damage. A soft, stifled sound came from behind me. Father Miguel Vasquez's breath catching in what sounded like a mixture of sorrow and resignation. Rosa Vasquez here is one of our success stories, Thompson said, turning his frigid gaze upon her. 3 years of shared consciousness with minimal resistance, though lately her human side has been problematic, inefficient. I'm still here, Rosa Vasquez whispered, her voice laced with a chilling undertone that definitely wasn't hers. Something ancient and formal that made my skin crawl. For now, Thompson replied with a knowing smile, a predatory glint in his eyes. But that brings us to why you're really here, He led us to a large desk cluttered with files, photographs, and documents covered in cryptic symbols I couldn't decipher. I recognized some of the faces in the photographs, recipients I'd delivered packages to over the past few days. In every photo, their eyes were completely black, devoid of any light or humanity. The network is expanding faster than ever before, Thompson said, spreading the documents across the desk surface. We need coordinators who can manage the increasing volume of transfers, handle the more complex negotiations, and ensure smooth operations. Your grandfather was our primary coordinator until his death. Now that position falls to you, but I never agreed to this, I said, though even as I spoke the words, I knew how hollow and futile they sounded. Your grandfather made the agreement for you, Thompson replied matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. Bloodline compatibility. You see, the entities respond better to certain genetic markers, and your family carries the right combination of traits. I felt trapped, the crushing weight of inherited responsibility pressing down on me like a tangible force. What if I refuse? Thompson's smile was utterly devoid of warmth, as cold and empty as a winter grave. Then you become inventory instead of management, another package to be processed and distributed. The morning's deliveries took on a horrifying new dimension with this terrible knowledge weighing upon me. Every package I carried was more than just a cardboard box. It was a vessel of stolen souls, a carrier of malevolent entities waiting to inhabit new human hosts. The weight was not just physical but spiritual, pressing down on my consciousness like a lead blanket. Rosa Vasquez's condition deteriorated visibly throughout the day. Her moments of lucidity grew shorter and less frequent, and when the entity took control, it spoke with increasing boldness and confidence. She grows tiresome, it said through Rosa Vasquez's mouth as we sat in the truck during our lunch break. Her resistance wastes energy that could be better spent on our work. Soon, there will be only us. Let her go, I pleaded, though I knew it was futile even as I spoke. We cannot. She opened the door willingly, even if unknowingly. The contract is binding according to laws far older than your human understanding. What contract? I asked, my voice trembling. Rule 7. Never open any package even if asked by the recipient. She broke that rule 3 years ago and invited us in. The invitation cannot be withdrawn. I watched Rosa Vasquez's face struggle, her human consciousness fighting desperately to surface. For a brief moment, her eyes cleared completely, and she looked at me with desperate pleading. Don't let them take you completely, she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible. There's still a way to keep yourself. Negotiate. Negotiate terms with them. Then her eyes rolled back, showing only whites, and the entity resumed full control with a satisfied sigh. The afternoon brought multiple rule violations, though not by my choice. A package began glowing so brightly that I couldn't avoid looking at it directly, immediately experiencing visions of impossible geometries that made my head throb and my vision blur. Another package started screaming with such intensity and desperation that Rosa Vasquez, or the thing controlling her, could barely manage the emergency drive to the church while the horrible sounds filled the truck. With each violation, I felt something fundamental changing inside me. The entities seemed to recognize me differently now, their whispered voices shifting from hunger and predation to anticipation and something that might have been welcome. As evening approached, We received an emergency call to deliver a special package to the town center. This package was different from all the others, larger, heavier, and it moved constantly, writhing and shifting in the back of the truck like something alive and desperate to escape its cardboard prison. When we arrived at the town square, I was shocked to find it filled with people. Every resident of Perdition Valley seemed to be gathered there, standing in perfect, unnatural silence. Their eyes reflected no light, and they all faced the center of the square, where a makeshift platform had been hastily erected. "Get out," Rosa Vasquez said, but her voice now carried only the formal tone of the entity controlling her. "It's time for the negotiation. They've been waiting." I climbed out of the truck on unsteady legs, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The crowd parted to create a clear path to the platform, their movements unnaturally synchronized, like dancers following choreography they'd practiced for years. As I walked through them, whispers in ancient languages filled the air around me, creating a sound like wind through dead leaves. On the platform stood the elderly woman who ran the cemetery office, but her appearance had changed dramatically. Her eyes glowed with an inner fire that cast no light, and when she spoke, her voice resonated with the power of something ancient and vast. "We have been patient," she said, her words carrying across the silent square like a bell tolling. "But patience has limits, even for beings such as ourselves. You will choose now, cooperation or consumption." "What kind of cooperation?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "You will coordinate the network, manage the transfers between vessels, ensure efficient distribution of consciousness, and minimize wastage," the entity explained through the woman's mouth. "In return, you maintain your individual identity while gaining access to our collective knowledge and power. And if I refuse, then you become housing, like Rosa Vasquez, like Jake, like all who refused our generous offer before you." I looked back at Rosa Vasquez, standing motionless beside the truck. For the briefest moment, her human consciousness managed to surface one last time, and she mouthed a single crucial word: terms. Understanding flooded through me like cold water. This wasn't just about acceptance or refusal. It was about negotiation, about finding terms both sides could accept. "I'll coordinate your network," I said, addressing the entity directly. "But I have conditions that must be met." The glowing eyes fixed on me with what might have been surprise. "Conditions? You are hardly in a position to make demands, little human." "Actually, I'm in the perfect position," I replied, finding confidence I didn't know I possessed. "You need a human coordinator with the right bloodline compatibility. According to you, that's me. But I won't do it unconditionally." A ripple of movement passed through the crowd, as if a single consciousness was considering my words and finding them unexpectedly interesting. "What do you propose?" "Willing hosts only. No more forced possessions. People who choose this arrangement get full disclosure of what they're agreeing to and what they're gaining. And in return, I'll manage your network efficiently and effectively. I'll find people who actually want what you offer: relief from pain, enhanced abilities, extended life, knowledge. There are humans who would choose partnership over their current existence if given the option." The entity was silent for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of its consideration pressing down on the entire square. "These terms are acceptable, but understand this completely. Once you begin this work, there is no withdrawal from the network. You become part of it permanently for the remainder of your existence." "I understand," I said, and found that I truly did. "Do you? Your grandfather thought he understood our arrangement, but he fought us for 40 years. His resistance made the network inefficient and dangerous. You will not repeat his mistakes." I thought of the notebooks filled with guilt and anguish, of my grandfather's obvious struggle with the role he'd been forced into. He tried to limit the network's damage while being compelled to participate in it. "I won't fight you," I said firmly, "but I'll hold you to our agreement." The entity smiled through the elderly woman's face, an expression that was both terrible and oddly reassuring. "Then let us begin your education, coordinator." The crowd began to disperse, their movements remaining synchronized and purposeful. As they walked away into the gathering darkness, I could see the variety of entities that inhabited them. Some ancient and patient, others restless and hungry, all bound together in this vast supernatural network that spanned far beyond the borders of Perdition Valley. Rosa Vasquez approached me, her movements more fluid and confident than they'd been in days. When she spoke, her voice carried both human and demonic tones in perfect harmony. "We are learning to coexist," she said, and for the first time she seemed at peace. As I considered her situation, Personnel only Vasquez offered, "It's not unpleasant once you cease struggling against the arrangement." A pressing need for certainty drove my question, "Are you still you?" "I am still Rosa Vasquez, but I am also more than Rosa Vasquez now. The entity brings knowledge, power, a perspective I never possessed before. In exchange, I offer humanity, creativity, and a connection to this world." Slowly, I nodded, beginning to grasp that this arrangement might not be the utter horror I'd initially conceived. "What happens now?" I inquired. "Now, you learn to manage the network efficiently, coordinate transfers between vessels, find willing hosts, and negotiate terms that benefit both human and entity consciousnesses." As we drove back to the depot through the hushed streets, the weight of my new responsibility settled over me like a heavy cloak. I was no longer merely a delivery driver. I was a broker between worlds, a coordinator of supernatural forces that most humans couldn't even begin to fathom. The network had claimed another coordinator, but this time it had gained one who valued negotiation over conquest, cooperation over domination. And somehow that resonated as right. The weak morning light filtered through the grimy windows of the UPS depot, casting long shadows across the concrete floor, where I stood, awaiting what would be my first day as the network's coordinator. The air was thick with the familiar scent of dust and old paper, yet beneath it, a tension lingered, different now, expectant rather than menacing, like the calm before a thunderstorm that would bring relief rather than destruction. I was no longer the skeptical delivery driver who had stumbled into this supernatural nightmare just days ago. The network had claimed me, but not as a victim. I had negotiated my way into something that felt almost like partnership. Personnel only Vasquez arrived early, her movements more fluid and confident than they'd been since her possession began 3 years ago. The jerky, uncertain gait that had marked her struggle with the entity was gone, replaced by a grace that seemed to blend human purpose with otherworldly awareness. When she spoke, her voice carried both human warmth and an otherworldly resonance that no longer frightened me. "Ready for your first day as coordinator?" she asked, and I could hear both Rosa Vasquez and her entity speaking in harmony, their voices creating subtle harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a single throat. Father Miguel Thompson was waiting for us in his office, his nervous energy replaced by a quiet efficiency that suggested enormous relief. The constant tremor in his hands had stopped, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked directly into my eyes without flinching. He handed me a tablet displaying the day's delivery schedule, but the interface was completely different from what I'd seen before. Instead of simple addresses and package weights, it included detailed notes on host compatibility ratings, entity preferences, territorial requirements, and special instructions for negotiation protocols. "This is your network now," Father Miguel Thompson said, his voice steady and clear for the first time since I'd met him. "Every package, every transfer, every host relationship falls under your direct management and oversight. Your grandfather would be proud to see what you've accomplished in just a few days." As I scrolled through the list, the enormity of the responsibility settled over me like a heavy cloak woven from ancient threads. The scope was staggering. Dozens of active transfers, hundreds of potential hosts, and a complex web of supernatural relationships that stretched far beyond Perdition Valley's borders. What about the hosts who don't want to participate? The people who refuse the arrangement? Father Miguel Thompson's eyes darkened slightly, a shadow of the old fear returning. "We try to find willing hosts first, always, but sometimes the network requires persuasion to maintain operational efficiency. The entities have needs that must be met." Personnel only Vasquez touched my arm gently, her fingers warm despite the otherworldly energy that seemed to flow beneath her skin. "Persuasion doesn't have to mean force. There are ways to make the arrangement genuinely beneficial for both parties. We've learned that cooperation yields better results than coercion. Our first task was reviewing the comprehensive list of potential hosts throughout Perdition Valley and the surrounding areas. The network had grown considerably over the past few decades, and with that growth came increasing complexity that required careful management. Some hosts actively sought relief from chronic pain or debilitating conditions. Others desired enhanced physical or mental abilities, and a surprising few simply wanted to experience consciousness beyond normal human limitations. The entities offered real gifts: healing, strength, knowledge, extended life, but the price was always the sharing of consciousness space. I spent the morning learning the intricate language of supernatural negotiation. The entities communicated in formal, archaic tones that carried layers of meaning built over centuries of existence. Their speech patterns were layered with both ancient wisdom and subtle threats, requiring careful interpretation and delicate diplomacy. I had to learn to broker deals that balanced legitimate human needs with entity requirements while preserving as much individual humanity as possible in each arrangement. One of the most challenging aspects was territory management. Each entity had distinct preferences and requirements that went far beyond simple geography. Some thrived in rural isolation, where they could commune with natural forces and draw power from the earth itself. Others preferred urban density, where they could feed on the energy of human crowds and the electromagnetic pulse of modern life. Matching compatible hosts to appropriate entities required careful consideration of geography, personality types, spiritual inclinations, and the subtle energetic patterns that bound human and supernatural consciousness together. By midday, personnel only Vasquez and I retreated to the secure room in the depot basement, where she could rest and maintain her delicate balance. The process of sharing consciousness with an ancient entity was physically and mentally exhausting, requiring regular periods of recovery to prevent either consciousness from overwhelming the other and destroying the careful equilibrium they'd achieved. "How are you feeling?" I asked, watching her eyes flicker between warm brown and personnel only. Vasquez and I retreated to the secure room in the depot basement, where she could rest and maintain her delicate balance. The process of sharing consciousness with an ancient entity was physically and mentally exhausting, requiring regular periods of recovery to prevent either consciousness from overwhelming the other and destroying the careful equilibrium they'd achieved. "How are you feeling?" I asked, watching her eyes flicker between warm brown and something deeper, more alien. A gaze that hinted at millennia of accumulated knowledge. "Better than I have in months," she replied, a genuine relief coloring her voice, making her seem years younger. The negotiation helped establish clear boundaries between my consciousness and my passengers. I can think clearly as myself again, even while sharing space with something that experiences reality in ways I'm only beginning to understand. And the entity, its content, satisfied in ways it hasn't been for decades. Having a willing partner instead of a resistant victim makes the arrangement more efficient for both of us. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, fraught with ethical complexities that would test every moral principle I'd ever held. The network was vast and ancient, its momentum built over decades of operation and traditions that stretched back centuries. My role was to guide it toward sustainability while preventing it from consuming the town's population entirely. But for the first time since arriving in Perdition Valley, I felt a genuine glimmer of hope that we could transform something predatory into something genuinely beneficial. The afternoon was spent in the field, visiting potential hosts and explaining the new voluntary arrangements we were implementing. The responses varied dramatically. Some people were deeply skeptical of anything involving supernatural entities. Others were desperate enough to consider any option that might improve their circumstances, and a surprising number were genuinely eager to explore the possibilities of enhanced existence. Our first stop was the local nursing home, where we met with Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who had volunteered for the Mobility Enhancement Program. The entity specializing in pain management had formed a partnership with her 3 days earlier, and the transformation was remarkable. "It's the best I've felt in 20 years, she told us, her eyes shining with gratitude as she demonstrated her renewed ability to walk without assistance, climb stairs, and move with a grace that belied her 83 years. "I can tend my garden again," visit with my grandchildren without being a burden. The entity asks for so little in return, just the chance to experience the world through human senses. Rosa Vasquez smiled warmly, her expression carrying both human compassion and otherworldly understanding. The entity prefers hosts who genuinely appreciate what it offers. The relationship works better when both parties benefit from the arrangement. We visited several other successful partnerships throughout the afternoon. A young man with severe depression had formed a symbiotic relationship with an entity that specialized in emotional regulation, his suicidal thoughts replaced by a calm clarity he'd never experienced before. An artist with failing eyesight now painted with supernatural clarity, thanks to her entity partner, creating works that seemed to capture dimensions of reality invisible to normal human perception. Each case was different, but all showed the potential for genuine cooperation rather than parasitic consumption. As evening approached, we had one final appointment that would test the new system's viability. Father Miguel, the local Catholic priest, had requested a meeting to discuss the church's position regarding the network's operations and the spiritual implications of supernatural coexistence. "You're asking me to allow demon possession in my town?" he asked, his voice heavy with theological concern, as we sat in his modest office beside the sanctuary, surrounded by religious texts and artifacts that seemed to hum with their own protective energy. "Not possession in the traditional sense," I corrected carefully, choosing my words with diplomatic precision. "We're talking about controlled, consensual coexistence between willing human hosts and ancient entities, seeking symbiotic relationships based on mutual benefit." He considered this distinction carefully, his weathered hands folded over his Bible as he weighed spiritual doctrine against practical reality. "And what about sacred ground? What protections remain for those who seek sanctuary from supernatural influence?" "Church property remains completely protected," I assured him with absolute conviction. "No entity enters without explicit permission from church leadership. No possessions or transfers occur during religious services. Sacred ground maintains its traditional sanctity, and anyone seeking refuge here will find it. How can I know they'll honor these agreements? What guarantee do I have that these entities won't simply ignore our arrangements when it suits their purposes? Because I'll personally enforce them. That's my responsibility as network coordinator. Any violation of our agreements will result in immediate intervention and consequences that the entities understand and respect." The priest studied my face for a long moment, searching for signs of deception, coercion, or supernatural influence that might compromise my judgment. Finally, he nodded slowly, his expression cautiously optimistic. "I'll need to see these partnerships in action before I can offer the church's endorsement, but I'm willing to observe and learn." A tentative alliance had been formed, one that could serve as a model for expanding the network's operations while maintaining community trust and moral integrity. That night, I sat in my grandfather's kitchen, surrounded by his notebooks and the weight of inherited responsibility that felt less burdensome now that I understood its true purpose. The house felt different, still old and creaky, but no longer threatening or alien. It was simply home, a place where I belonged and could find peace. Rosa Vasquez joined me, her presence a comforting reminder of how adaptation and cooperation could transform even the most impossible circumstances into something workable and even beneficial. "Are you happy with how things turned out?" she asked softly, her voice carrying both human concern and supernatural curiosity about the complex emotions that drove human decision-making. I considered the question carefully, weighing the enormity of what I'd inherited against the satisfaction of finding purpose in the most unlikely circumstances. "I'm useful. I'm needed. I'm keeping people safe while helping others get what they genuinely need. It's not the life I planned when I came here, but it's the life that chose you," she finished with understanding that transcended species boundaries. I smiled, feeling the strange comfort of my new role settling into place like a perfectly fitted garment. "Exactly. What's our schedule tomorrow?" I inquired, the weight of responsibility feeling oddly right. 3 more nursing home residents are eager to participate in the mobility enhancement program, Rosa Vasquez responded, consulting her notes with a practiced efficiency, a testament to her acceptance of her own unique existence. And we have a meeting scheduled with the town council regarding the expansion of our operations into the neighboring communities. All participants are, of course, willing, entirely voluntary. Every single person understands precisely what they're agreeing to and the benefits they'll receive in exchange for sharing consciousness space. Then let's continue making deliveries, I affirmed. The network pulsed with life, thriving now on principles of reciprocity rather than the raw, predatory hunger it once knew. Rosa Vasquez and I had carved out our place in this bizarre, transformed world, acting as conduits, bridges between the needs of humanity and the cravings of the supernatural, all while diligently preserving the dignity and autonomy of both. As I gazed out the window, across the tranquil streets of Perdition Valley, I could discern the subtle luminescence emanating from packages being prepared for the morrow's deliveries. The supernatural transportation network, an ancient entity, never truly slumbered, never ceased its work of ferrying beings between willing hosts, individuals who had consciously chosen enhancement over the mundane existence of the ordinary. But now it was a system I could coordinate with a sense of pride, a system predicated on the preservation of human dignity, while simultaneously satiating ancient hungers through cooperation, not conquest. The inheritance my grandfather bequeathed to me was more than just a house, a job. It was an opportunity, a calling to transmute something profoundly terrible into something that might, perhaps, genuinely improve the lives of people, grant them a fuller existence. I was no longer simply surviving in Perdition Valley. I was actively contributing to its evolution, shaping it into something far better, far more enlightened than it had ever been before. And somehow that resonated deep within me, felt profoundly, irrevocably right. The network had discovered its new coordinator, and I, in turn, had unearthed my purpose in a world far stranger, far more wondrous than I could have ever dared to imagine.